Good afternoon, my friends. This is Paul, and today I'm going to be reviewing to you Life is Strange Double Exposure for the Nintendo Switch. I love Life is Strange so much that there has not been a year where a Life is Strange game has come out on the Switch where I haven't either wanted it to be on my best games of the year list or did. In the case of True Colors, I just barely played it too late into 2022 for it to qualify for the 2021 list. And it's looking like this year is going to be no exception. Spoilers, I guess, for that video, if that's a thing. And I'm here to tell you why I think Double Exposure is, as of now, my favorite Life is Strange game. So first off, let's start out with the premise. This is the first direct sequel we have ever seen in the series. The other games were kind of loosely connected, but for the most part were in their own self-contained universes of sorts where the characters and environments were very standalone. This time around, you play as Max Caulfield, who was the protagonist of the original Life is Strange, albeit in a new place. Now she's at Caledon University teaching about photography rather than being a student at Blackwell University. And she's still played by Hannah Tell 9 years later, and Hannah is still an absolutely wonderful actress and has done an amazing job. I mean, I've never thought there was a bad actor in the Life is Strange series, but having Hannah back is so refreshing because it seems like every other game is trying to radically reinvent things, and so having a little bit of familiarity is a really nice touch. Just in case you haven't seen my other Life is Strange reviews, the gist of the gameplay is that it's kind of like a walking simulator, but you make choices in conversations as well as what you interact with, and those decisions will influence the outcome of pretty much everything when it comes to how the characters respond to you, and then eventually you'll be able to get multiple endings. And the game will usually have some kind of indicator that says, oh, this action's going to have consequences, so be warned. And a lot of times these consequences are so subtle, you might not even notice that how can that little thing affect so much? But then at the end of each chapter, they give a percentage of how many players throughout the world made the same decisions as you, and it'll give you every outcome, like 50% of players experienced this character being mad, while the other 50 experienced this character being happy, and you're like, what did I even do to influence that character's mood? And so it's a great incentive to replay the game and see if maybe you can make different decisions. What sets Double Exposure apart is that in the first Life is Strange game, Max could rewind time. And in subsequent games, each character would have some kind of new power that would both alter the gameplay and the story. This time around, the gist is that Max doesn't rewind time, she travels between two different timelines. One where her new best friend is dead, and one where she is alive. And this manifests gameplay-wise in two distinct ways. You can purge, which is where Max can sort of see shadows of things in the other timeline while still existing in her own. So for instance, she might see footprints from the other timeline, or see a character sitting on a bench that isn't there in the current timeline, and you can listen in to the conversations and maybe follow footprints. But then there's also just flat out shifting. Now, to prevent this from being totally broken, and also just in case people are watching and you have the Twilight Princess syndrome of Midna saying, hey, don't transform when everyone's around, you have to go to specific shifting points that are out of view of everyone. And then Max will sort of act like she's opening curtains, and then you'll transport bodily into the next timeline. And it really is impressive how much Max keeps track of what stuff happens in which. As far as I could tell, there's only one time in the entire game where she slipped up and mentioned something in the other timeline to someone that didn't know that she had powers. But apart from that, it is very impressive how well the game makes sure that it doesn't try to give you too much of a headache. You can trigger an option so that it'll always tell you which timeline you're in. There's a notes section where Max will keep up a current commentary on what she thinks about each character and like her suspicions that she might have as far as like, oh, this is how I think this character is involved in the plot. And it does a great job of providing the unreliable narrator trope because this is all coming from Max's perspective. It's not an objective notes category, so for all you know, what she's thinking may not actually be indicative of what actually happened. Now, I love games that involve time travel and alternate timelines. Zero Escape is my favorite franchise. I love games like Xenoblade Chronicles 3, which has multiple timelines, and this game is no exception. I loved trying to keep track of what happened in each timeline, and I loved how applicable some of these solutions were to the puzzles involved. This is not exactly a strenuous game by any chance. None of the puzzles are probably going to take you more than a few minutes to figure out. But it is cool to say like, oh wow, that puzzle was only possible because of quantum leaps. And that was the case with the first Life is Strange game, and I'm torn between which one I think is better. I think gameplay-wise, rewinding time probably makes for a cooler mechanic because you could make a major choice and then rewind time to see what happens if you pick the other option. Whereas in this game, yeah, it's cool to jump between timelines, but to also like see into the other one without actually jumping. But at the same time, you don't rewind time, you just go to a different time. Like, everything is the same except for the girl's dead in one and alive in another. I think I like the overall execution of just about everything else in Double Exposure so much more. I appreciate that Max's new best friend to replace Chloe is, well, she's still a bit of an idiot, but not as over the top as Chloe was. Like, sure, she's immature and selfish, but it doesn't come across as aggravating as Chloe did. Max is still a bit of a troublemaker, and there's still some moral ambiguity to some of the stuff that she does, but to be fair, every Life is Strange game to date has had certain sections where I'm like, that goes a little bit against my morals, but you do have a say in certain things that the characters do. For example, you can choose whether or not to romance certain characters, and if you don't want to kiss anyone, you don't have to. You can make it so that Max just keeps things platonic with everyone. And I like that you have options in that regard. And I also appreciate how, being Catholic, I made most of the choices based on my morals and what the church teaches, and tried as hard as I could to not do anything stupid or illegal unless the game forced me to, and generally speaking, I think I got the best ending I could have as a result of that. One thing that I think is a little bit not as cool as the other Life is Strange games is that it doesn't seem like there are enough fatal consequences. Like in previous games, some characters' lives would depend on your decision, and especially in the games where you couldn't rewind time, it made the punishment feel more severe because, again, the statistics will show you 50 some odd % of the players let this character live, and as far as I could tell, nothing like that happens in Double Exposure. I don't think there was a single time where I said, "Aw, darn it, now I regret my decision." If anything, I was like, oh, that's the only thing that happens in the other one? Okay, no big deal. But at the same time, the story in Double Exposure got me hooked in ways that the other games don't even come close. I loved how it presented itself kind of like a mystery novel, where like you try to figure out like, okay, who is involved in all this and why. And of course the ending sequence is just phenomenal, and it has just the right amount of nostalgia without feeling too much like pandering. Overall, I loved going to each chapter and being stunned by the revelations and trying to figure out what happened next. I was slightly disappointed that not every question is sufficiently answered, but I believe the reason why that is because they're going to explain it in the sequel. Yes, they confirm that there is going to be a follow-up to this game. I know that may seem like a spoiler, but I feel like for players that like clarity in their games, knowing that there's a possibility that those questions will be answered in a future game might be something that players might want to take into consideration in case, I don't know, something happens and they're not able to get the next game, and want to know, like, should I look up the answer to that? Because that question was just not answered sufficiently. Either that or I just wasn't paying attention. But I'm pretty sure there were some things that were left up for the sequel. In conclusion, Double Exposure has a phenomenal storyline that kept me guessing throughout the whole game. It had some amazing revelations. It was a lot of fun to go through. I loved hearing Max's snarky commentary on everything that she looked at. And I liked how, even though, yes, she was a troublemaker and liked to snoop, she at the same time had a real heart for her friends. And there were even times where she decided to take action on her own without my input. And I was thinking, like, you go, Max. I probably would have made that same decision myself. And while I don't like all of the characters in the game, none of them come quite as close to how much I absolutely despised Chloe. They felt more like True Colors was the game that I thought had the best characters overall, and I think these characters have probably come the closest to that small town vibe that True Colors gave off. Double Exposure is still my favorite Life is Strange game, and I still absolutely recommend it. Do I recommend it at the full $50? It depends on how quickly you want the game, because as of the time of this recording, there is a physical version coming out in January of 2025 that you could rent from Gamefly, and the $50 version of the game is the base price, but you can also pay an additional $10 to get more outfits as well as cat content, whatever that means, and then you can pay an additional $10 to get more outfits. I think Double Exposure is amazing. Maybe worth a rental if you're not the biggest fan of Life is Strange games and you just want to play the game once and be done with it. But if you think that this is a replayable game where you can see what your choices do differently on another playthrough, then yeah, I think you should buy it. Maybe wait for it to go on sale though if you're getting on the Switch, because while this is, in my opinion, the most optimized Life is Strange game for the Switch, it's still not without its flaws. The game is absolutely gorgeous, and for the most part runs great, but there are some tiny little technical issues, none of them game-breaking by any means, but they all just kind of add up to make it feel like, yeah, this wasn't originally a Switch game. For starters, some of the scenes near the end of the game have some colors at the bottom of the screen that are kind of reminiscent of the "we are having technical difficulties, please stand by," those kinds of screens. Sometimes characters would pop in and out of focus. There was one time where a character in the background was the focus of the conversation instead of the people who were actually talking. The game did say an error occurred the very first time I started it up, but then the game still proceeded as normal. And there are also a few times where things like flicker. But apart from that, this game is quite a joy to look at. I am a huge fan of the season of winter, and seeing as the game takes place pretty much exclusively in the winter time, it's always so wonderful to see the snowy scenery. I hope you've appreciated my gushing of this franchise, and I hope that if you enjoyed the adventures of Max Caulfield in the first Life is Strange game, that you will be pleased to know that Max has evolved enough from her previous experiences while still feeling like the Max that you know and love. And the time travel gameplay is still addicting even if you can't rewind anymore. And in my opinion, it certainly beats the other powers in Life is Strange 2 and True Colors. And I hope that Deck 9 continues to improve upon this foundation going forward. So with that, thank you very much for watching. Let me know down in the comments if you have any questions and your previous experience with Life is Strange games. And until the next time, remember to keep the faith, stay epic, and God bless. Bye!